Welcome back to World Military. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most decisive forces of World War II, the Soviet tanks that turned the tide on the Eastern Front. Imagine the summer of 1941. Nazi Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history, with more than 3 million troops, thousands of aircraft, and over 3,000 Panzers rolling across the Soviet border in a massive coordinated assault. The Red Army is caught completely off guard. Its armored forces are scattered across a huge frontier, many of its tanks are already obsolete, command structures are disrupted by Stalin's purges, and fuel and spare parts are in short supply. Yet, from this near catastrophic beginning, Soviet industry, engineering genius, and sheer human determination produced an armored avalanche that would eventually crush the Wehrmacht and help save the world from fascism. This is the full story of how Soviet tanks evolved from fragile scouts to unstoppable steel monsters, and how they became one of the most important factors in winning the Great Patriotic War. The roots of Soviet tank power go back to the chaotic years after the 1917 revolution. The new Bolshevik government inherited almost nothing in terms of modern armor from the Tsarist army. Tanks were virtually unknown in Russia during the First World War. But the Reds quickly realized their potential after capturing or observing British Mark V heavy tanks and French Renault FT light tanks used by white forces and foreign interventionists during the Civil War. The first serious Soviet tank, designated T-18 or MS-1, appeared in small numbers in 1928. It was a modest copy of the Renault FT. Small, slow, lightly armed with a 37mm gun and armored only against rifle fire. But it was cheap, mechanically simple, and easy to produce in the young Soviet factories. More importantly, it established the core Soviet tank philosophy that would carry through the entire Second World War. Build in huge quantities, designed for reliability in extreme weather and rough terrain, accept compromises in comfort and sophistication, and trust that sheer numbers combined with aggressive tactics would prevail. The 1930s brought rapid change. Stalin's 5-year plans turned the Soviet Union into an industrial powerhouse. Billions of rubles were poured into heavy industry, steel mills, locomotive plants, and new tank design bureaus. Soviet engineers traveled abroad, studied foreign designs, and even purchased examples. One of the most important acquisitions was the American Christie suspension system, which used large road wheels and helical springs to allow very high road speeds when the tracks were removed and the tank ran on wheels. This technology produced the famous BT series Bystrokodny tank, or fast tank. The BT-2, BT-5, and especially the BT-7 were fast. Lightly armored cavalry tanks capable of 50-70 km per hour on roads. They carried a 45mm high-velocity gun that could knock out most contemporary light and medium tanks at medium range. The BT series was intended for the kind of deep, rapid breakthroughs envisioned in Soviet deep battle doctrine. At the same time, the T-26 light tank based on the British Vickers 6-ton became the most numerous armored vehicle in the world by 1941, with over 11,000 built. It was a reliable infantry support tank, but its maximum armor of only 15mm made it extremely vulnerable to any anti-tank weapon. Real combat experience soon exposed serious flaws. During the Spanish Civil War, 1936-1939, Soviet T-26 and BT tanks supplied to the Republican side performed adequately against Italian and early German armor, but suffered heavy losses to 37mm PAK, 36 anti-tank guns, and 88mm flak guns used in the ground. The Winter War against Finland, 1939-1940, was even more humiliating. Light tanks bogged down in deep snow, froze solid in temperatures of -40 degrees, and were easily destroyed by Molotov cocktails and 37mm Bofors guns. Finnish ski troops could approach undetected and place charges under the thin belly armor. These lessons were brutal but valuable. The Red Army needed thicker frontal armor, wider tracks for better flotation in snow and mud, more powerful guns, and engines that could start reliably in extreme cold. By late 1939, a new design bureau led by Mikhail Koshkin at factory number 183 inches. Kharkov presented a prototype that would change armored warfare forever. The tank was initially called A-20, then A-32, and finally accepted as the T-34. It weighed 26 tons, had exceptionally wide tracks to distribute weight over soft ground, a Christie-derived suspension for good cross-country mobility, and most revolutionary of all, sloped armor plates on the hull and turret that dramatically increased effective thickness without excessive weight. The frontal armor was 45 millimeters thick but sloped at 60 degrees, giving the equivalent protection of nearly 90 millimeters vertical armor. The main armament was the excellent 76.2 millimeters F-34 high-velocity gun, which could penetrate early Panzer IIIs and IVs at ranges of 1,000 meters or more. The Diesel 5.2 engine was reliable, fuel-efficient, and far less prone to catastrophic fires than the gasoline engines used in most German tanks. When Operation Barbarossa began on the 22nd of June 1941, only a few hundred T-34S and a smaller number of KV heavy tanks were in frontline units. Most Soviet armor still consisted of T-26 light tanks, BT fast tanks, and a variety of obsolete or captured foreign models. The Germans achieved stunning initial successes, destroying or capturing tens of thousands of Soviet vehicles in the first months. But wherever T-34S and KV-1S appeared in numbers, the situation changed dramatically. At the Battle of Rysinyi in Lithuania in late June 1941, a single KV-1 held up an entire German panzer division for 2 days, shrugging off hits from 37mm and 50mm guns. In the same period, small groups of T-34S ambushed German columns, knocking out dozens of panzers before being overwhelmed by artillery or air attack. German tank crews and generals were shocked. General Heinz Guderian later admitted that the appearance of the T-34 caused a crisis of confidence in German armor superiority. The KV series deserves special mention. Named after People's Commissar for Defense Kliment Voroshilov, the KV-1 weighed 47 tons and carried up to 90 millimeters of cast frontal armor, completely proof against the standard German 37mm PAK-36 and very difficult for the 50mm PAK-38. Its 76.2mm gun was identical to the early T-34s, but the sheer mass and armor made it a terrifying opponent in defensive positions. The even heavier KV-2 mounted a 152mm M10 howitzer in a tall, boxy turret intended to demolish field fortifications. While the KV-2 was slow and top-heavy, it could destroy any German tank or bunker with a single high-explosive shell. Despite these impressive individual performances, 1,941 was a disaster for Soviet armor. Poor coordination, inadequate radios, mechanical unreliability in early production batches, and the sheer speed of the German advance led to encirclements and mass surrenders. By December 1941, the Red Army had lost more than 20,000 tanks, but the Soviets did not collapse. Stalin ordered the mass evacuation of tank factories eastward. Kharkov Locomotive Factory, no. 183 was dismantled under German artillery fire and shipped by rail to the Ural Mountains. Chelyabinsk Tractor Factory became Tankograd, where T-34 and KV production resumed at an astonishing rate. Workers, many of them women and teenagers, labored 12 to 16-hour shifts in freezing, unheated halls. By mid-1942, Soviet monthly tank output had surpassed Germany's. The T-34 was continually refined under combat pressure. Early complaints about two-man turrets, commander had to load the gun as well as direct the crew, poor visibility, crude optics, and frequent transmission failures were gradually addressed. Cast turrets replaced welded ones for faster production. The 1943 model introduced a commander's cupola for better situational awareness. The most important upgrade came in early 1944 with the T-34-85, a larger three-man turret and an 85mm ZSS-53 gun capable of penetrating the frontal armor of a Panther at 800 meters and a Tiger at 500 meters under good conditions. Over 35,000 T-34 IS-76S and nearly 20,000 T-34-85S were built during the war, numbers no other country could match. Heavy tanks evolved in parallel. The KV series was phased out by 1943 because its armor could no longer reliably stop the German 88mm KWK-36/43 or the new 75mm KWK-42. The replacement was the IS-Iosif Stalin series. The IS-1 was a transitional model, but the IS-2, introduced in late 1943, became legendary. It weighed 46 tons, had a sloped pike-nose frontal armor up to 120mm thick, and mounted the powerful 122mm D-25T gun. A single AP round from the D-25T could rip the turret off a Tiger at 1,000 meters. IS-2S led the spearheads during Operation Bagration in the summer of 1944, the largest Soviet offensive of the war, which destroyed German Army Group Center and liberated Belarus in a matter of weeks. In the final battle for Berlin in April-May 1945, IS-2S blasted their way through barricades and strongpoints, their heavy guns demolishing buildings where Panther and Tiger crews tried to make a stand. Self-propelled guns and tank destroyers played an equally vital role. The Su-76 light assault gun, based on the T-70 chassis, was produced in huge numbers and used for direct infantry support. The Su-85 and Su-100 mounted high-velocity 85mm and 100mm guns on T-34 chassis, turning them into deadly tank hunters. The Su-152, nicknamed Zveroboy, Beast Killer, used the same 152mm howitzer as the KV-2, but in a low, heavily armored casemate. A direct hit from an Su-152 could literally tear the turret off a Tiger or Panther. Soviet tank doctrine was based on Marshal Tukhachevsky's pre-war deep battle theory, which emphasized simultaneous attacks across multiple axes, rapid penetration to operational depth, and encirclement of large enemy formations. Tanks were never used alone. They operated as part of combined arms groups with artillery, engineers, infantry, and air support. Maskirovka, camouflage, and deception was practiced at every level. Dummy tanks made of wood and canvas drew German fire, while real armored columns advanced under cover of darkness or bad weather. The human side of this armored war was brutal. Soviet tank crews lived in cramped, poorly ventilated compartments. In winter, the temperature inside could drop to minus 30 degrees. In summer, it could exceed 50. Ventilation was minimal, ammunition fumes were choking, and escape hatches were often too small or jammed. Crews of 4 or 5 men had to perform multiple roles under extreme stress. Yet extraordinary acts of bravery occurred every day. Tank ace Dmitry Lavernenko destroyed 52 German tanks in 1941 before being killed at age 27. Mariya Oktyabrskaya, a grieving widow, sold all her possessions to buy a T-34 she named Fighting Girlfriend and drove it into battle until she was fatally wounded in 1944. Allied Lend-Lease aid provided valuable supplements around 11,000 tanks and self-propelled guns from the United States and Britain, but they never exceeded 10% of total Soviet armored strength. American M4 Shermans and M3 Lees, British Valentines, and Matildas were appreciated for their reliability and radios, but the backbone remained domestic designs. By the end of the war, the Soviet Union had produced more than 100,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. Germany managed fewer than 25,000 during the same period. Simplicity, mass production, ruggedness, and the willingness to accept losses allowed the Red Army to overwhelm the technically superior but numerically inferior German Panzer forces. The legacy of these tanks is profound. The T-34's sloped armor was copied by the Germans in the Panther and by virtually every post-war design. The IS-2 influenced heavy tank development until the early 1960s. Soviet tanks helped liberate Eastern Europe, captured Berlin, and ended the war in Europe. They remain symbols of resilience, sacrifice, and the power of industrial mobilization in the face of existential threat. If this story of steel, fire, and unbreakable will move you, please hit the like button if you learned something new, subscribe for more in-depth military history, and leave a comment below. Which Soviet tank fascinates you the most? The revolutionary T-34, the fearsome IS-2, or perhaps the humble but ubiquitous T-26? I read every comment and love hearing your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.